Welcome to the Empathic Mastery Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Moore, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place where we talk about what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, how this impacts all aspects of our lives, and we explore tools, resources, and solutions so we can shift from absorbing all the thoughts, feelings, and energy of the world around us to being beacons for calm, love, and healing.
Hey there, everybody. I'm back. And today I have an absolutely delightful guest. Lauren Wittig is an intuitive energy healer and transformation mentor, the founder of Heartlight Wellness, the host of Curiously Wise podcast, which is where we connected, and an award-winning novelist. Her passion is assisting her clients through their journeys out of mind, body, and or spiritual pain and into a life of passion and joy. Lauren's own journey from emotional pain and deteriorating health to happiness and great health with the assistance of several intuitive healers is the very thing that inspires her passion to help others with her own healing gifts. Welcome, Lauren. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Jen. I'm so happy we get to have another conversation.
Oh, me too. It was so... Before we jumped on, we were talking about, neither of us could remember the exact details of what we talked about, but we could remember the energy. And
right.
Which really reminds me of something. People don't remember you for what you do. They remember you for how they make you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that certainly is the case for me with you.
Yeah. It was just so much fun to be in that conversation and in the energy with you. I just had a blast. So
yeah, me too. Yeah. And you guys check out Lauren's podcast, Curiously Wise, because it is awesome.
Yeah.
There are so many things even in your bio that I'm like, award-winning novelist. Let's talk about that. But we're going to talk about some other stuff. But I didn't, the piece about deteriorating health, that's another thing that I would love to talk about.
Yeah.
Because, that seems to be such a challenge for so many empaths, especially if we don't know we're empaths. Before we go there, let's start at the beginning and just talk about kind of, what was it like to be, I'm assuming, a highly sensitive, empathic child?
Yeah, highly sensitive is the way I was described my whole childhood. And I think the number one thing I heard particularly from my mother is, why are you crying? You've got nothing to cry about. I didn't know why I was crying. I just knew that I felt bad, So yeah, it's being a child was difficult, being an empath, because I didn't know I was. People didn't talk about it back then. I'm over 60 now. And my mother was a narcissist and my dad was an alcoholic, and they were both had explosive anger issues. And thank God I had an older brother who was an introvert like me, and the two of us would just kind of like disappear into our rooms, get out of the way of what I now know are kind of emotion bombs that were being thrown back and forth. So it was not fun. It was not easy. I was depressed a lot. Didn't really know that that's what I was feeling. It was not an easy place to be as a kid.
No,
not at all. So,
not at all.
But I survived and I thrived.
Yeah.
But my health was always kind of rocky. As a kid, I was sick all the time. I'd get the flu like twice a year.
Wow.
I had bad allergies. Of course, I grew up in a house with dogs and cats. So that didn't help. But probably the main thing was, and I didn't learn this until literally my mid to late 50s. So maybe in the last 8 years or so, is that I learned to be afraid of everything. I learned to be afraid of everything.
Yes.
And being afraid was not allowed by my mother. You sucked it up and you did what you had to do, or you did what she thought you should be doing. And so I appeared quite brave and courageous, but inside I was not. And that, of course, fear is a big creator of allergies.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
So.
Well, and you're overriding your instincts and you're overriding your own fear and not honoring what's going on in your body constantly. And that, I believe that there are times where the saying, feel the fear and do it anyway, is appropriate, especially as an adult. Like if you need to set a boundary, feel the fear and do it anyway. But if you're being forced to do one thing after another that is not what you want to be doing, and you're scared of doing it, pushing yourself through fear upon fear upon fear, I mean,
it's not good for you.
Not good for you.
No,
not at all.
No.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the beginning of my ill health. I think I came into the world afraid because I was, sickly from an infancy. But yeah, once I got away from my parents, I got to go to boarding school at 13 for 2 years.
Wow.
And that was because of a lot of trauma that was their passion in life. And I was the pawn. But those 2 years away from home were an eye-opening experience for me. I blossomed. I was always the smart kid, but I was never the social kid. And there I had friends. I had my first boyfriend. The teachers liked me. I came out of my shell, and it was wonderful. And then my parents moved from Mississippi, which is where we were living at the time. It's where my family's all from, to DC. And I changed high school midway and had to live with them again. And my dad's drinking was a lot worse by that point. So that was really difficult, but I kind of escaped to school and, and they were working. And I was a teenager. So I was a latchkey teenager in DC, downtown, Capitol Hill, DC, not the safest area in town at the time anyway. But so I was alone a lot, and that was actually good. That was really, I was happy with that.
Yeah.
Then when I chose college, it was like, how far away can I get from my parents? And I wasn't allowed to go west, and I didn't want to go south because I didn't particularly like living in Mississippi. So I wasn't interested in that. So I went north. I went to New England. I went to Brown in Rhode Island.
Oh,
and that
cool.
That was a long, long day's drive.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, that's safe. And that was great. And I loved being up there, but I also was still feeling all the crap from my parents because I was so tightly connected, especially to my dad. But then my mom was gaslighting me. And so I was getting my dad's depression, even at that long distance. And I was getting my mom telling me that he wasn't drinking anymore. You should come home. And I would go home and he would be drunk. And she did that about 3 times. And I went, I'm not coming home again.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't trust her.
No.
Yeah. I had a lot of trust issues, particularly with her, but with dad too. I mean, with an alcoholic, you just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't know what's going to happen.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then in college, I did find a group. One of the deans had started a group for those of us who were students with parents who were alcoholics.
Oh my goodness.
And
That's
it was the
wonderful.
first time I found a group that had the same experience I did. And I swear to God, looking back, they're probably all empaths.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we all had the same issues. And that's, I think, when I began to understand how important community was to me.
Yes.
And which is a big piece of my wishes for the world right now is community, and my personal world too. But so I began to separate myself, and in that group, I was able to understand that what I was feeling was normal, not being too sensitive, that other people felt the same way, and that it was acceptable, and it was normal, and which was, for an empath in that kind of family, I was never the normal one.
Right.
So that's sort of where I began to get an inkling that I was not as overly sensitive as I had always been told I was.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you were responding, you were the healthy, or, I often think of the empaths as we're the canaries in the coal mine, that we're responding to the toxicity before people who can ignore it do.
Yeah.
But we're responding to something legit. It's not like it's not real. And of course, in a family system that's really dysfunctional, where you've got alcoholism and you've got, just raging narcissism and just massive rage addiction.
Yeah.
It's like, of course, they're going to invalidate and put down and tell you that you're the one who's crazy, because if you're not the one who's crazy, then they're going to have to look at their own behavior and do something about it.
Yeah. Take responsibility for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I'm I look back on it and I know that I'm the strong person I am now because of what I, came through.
Yes.
I wouldn't choose it again, but in hindsight, and it's a lot of hindsight at this point, I respect the strength that I had.
Yeah.
To move through that as a kid, even. And that's a really good thing to know about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There is this inner strength that nobody thought you had. And it's funny because I used to say to people all the time, I'm so much stronger than my family thinks I am. And I didn't really understand what I was saying at the time, but I knew that about myself. And that was really important for my own self-esteem. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Lauren, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the bittersweet nature of being transformed through sort of the forge of trauma and the crucible of growing up in a dysfunctional family. And on one hand, we can look at ourselves and just be like, I am who I am as a result of all of this. And I'm grateful for the lessons and I'm grateful for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yet at the same time, as you said, there's that part of us that's like, I would not want to do this over again. And I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Mm-mm.
And it's just such an interesting sort of, I don't know, like that paradox of we can both be grateful and still grieving at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and the grieving is important.
Yes.
That's another one of those things we don't want to hold in our body.
No.
And it'll come back periodically. I still now get choked up now and then when talking about my childhood. I've done pretty well today.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so important to know that sucked.
Yeah.
It was not, I defined my parenthood, me being a parent, as the opposite of what my parents did.
Yes. Yes.
And I really did define myself as what I wasn't going to be. Which served me well for a while, but then at a point, you got to figure out who you really are and what's really important. So it served me. It's one of those things that, serves you for a while, keeps you protected to some degree. I was very protective of my children with my parents.
Understandably.
And especially my mom, because my dad was dry for 20 years. I 12th stepped him when I was 21 years old. And he lived for 20 more years. He was just about to get his 20-year chip in AA. So, that did totally change things.
I am getting chills.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
He was such a good guy when he wasn't drunk.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Some of my absolute favorite people on the entire planet are recovering alcoholics.
Yeah.
And I also think a lot of times alcoholics are empaths as well.
Well, I was just about to say he was definitely an empath. I don't think any of us knew. I didn't even know what that word was.
Right. Right.
At that point, because we're talking the 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
I guess the early 81, I think is when I 12 stepped him when I was 21 years old. He was such a big heart, such a sweet person, and had so many worthiness issues. He came out of a very abusive physical and emotional family. Mine was at least just emotional. And I just looking back at him, he's like, oh my, I heard stories later from my grandmother, actually, my mom's mom, because she knew him when he was a child. And she said she always felt so bad for him because they just didn't treat him well. So I know that he probably, I'm sure he was an empath.
Yeah.
And he just, I don't know, he self-medicated for depression and all of that stuff. So.
Well, and we're talking about, in his particular case, I'm sort of imagining that your dad was probably born in the early 30s or,
1935. Yeah.
Yeah. Same parents, same generation of parents. I have the same exact generation of parents. My dad was born in 33 and my mom in 35. And, we are talking about a culture where men didn't do therapy. Where nobody was talking about about dysfunctional alcoholic families or abuse or any of these things. The basic message was, you get your lot in life and you endure it and you survive it. And so, of course, it's like, of course he's going to turn to alcohol. Like, why not?
And he comes from a long line of men who turned to alcohol and women who ended up either outliving everybody by decades because they're just that kind of woman, or dying early of cancer, so it was like either or for the women, but the men frequently died early, were alcoholics, had heart disease, had all kinds of, it was a mess.
Yeah.
And it was that whole Depression era. It was agricultural Mississippi, in the 1930s, 40s coming up. And it just, what a time and place that screwed people up big time.
Yeah.
So I admire my dad for how he endured. I really do. But it was not easy.
No.
So,
well, and what a gift that he was able to really spend the last 20 years of his life, I'm sure, since he was in 12-step programs, making reparations and really
doing a lot of good in the world.
Doing a lot of good.
Yeah. That was the one thing that was really confusing about my parents for me when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
They both were so outwardly focused in doing good in the world that they looked fabulous.
Yes.
And we'd get in the house and it would be Armageddon,
Yes.
And I admire them for what they did in the world. My dad was a civil rights lawyer. My mom worked all over the world with predominantly with women doing economic development projects within underdeveloped countries. They did these amazing things, but not to me.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and that's that's a quandary that I've thought about a lot, is a great deal about, is the whole thing of when you discover that a hero has feet of clay, when you learn about, when somebody has done an incredible amount of good in the world, but then you discover their dark underbelly. And it's like, do you write off everything good that they have done?
Yeah.
Or do you, do you see the nuances of they did a lot of good and they also were broken and wounded and caused a great deal of harm?
Yeah. And in some ways, I admire them a little more for doing the good when they were so broken.
Yes.
It wasn't what I wanted as a child. I wanted loving parents who, put me first kind of thing.
Right.
But they did a lot of good in the world. So, and I can appreciate that now.
Well, and I'm also imagining that in the case of your mom, as a woman born in the 30s and developing her career at a point where my mom became basically started to work again when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, so we're talking early 70s that my mom went back on the workforce, and I grew up in New England where it was much more liberated, but there was still she was an anomaly. She was a total outlier to go back out into the professional world. And for us to have two parents working full time in a culture that's not acceptable for women. So right. I'm just thinking, I wonder how much of your mother's narcissism got exacerbated and inflated by the need to pump herself up and basically be, in some ways, I'm imagining really shrill, but simultaneously really, really pleasant to get as far as she did in her career.
Yeah, it's always amazed me how her proteges adore her.
Yeah.
And as an adult, when she was getting older, she got dementia the last 10 years of her life, which was a whole nother great way to deal with it.
Oh, that's a whole podcast. You and I can go back and
we won't go to there.
Yeah.
But all these young women who she had influenced through this, she had taken up this program called appreciative inquiry in her work. It's a fabulous way of approaching problem solving in groups and businesses and things. And she taught it to a lot of people. And a lot of those people were young women of my age or younger. And I would meet some of them sometime at events that I would go to with her. And they would go, "Oh, you're Jane's daughter. You are so lucky to have her for a mom." And of course, I didn't want to go, "Oh, no, let me tell you the truth." So what I learned to say was, "Oh, you have no idea." So that was the best I could do. But yeah, it was really amazing but she really did. She went to an all women's college. She became a teacher because that was one of the, you could be a teacher or secretary pretty much when she graduated.
Or a nurse.
Yeah. That's when you got married, you were supposed to stop.
Yeah.
And she was definitely a feminist. Gloria Steinem was her idol, and she even wore her hair and got the same glasses and that kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was crazy. But so she fought hard to be accepted as a smart woman who was able to do good in the world and get paid for it.
Yes.
And, and I appreciate that about her. Not sure I'd choose that for my next mother, but that's okay.
Right.
But
well, you said something a little bit back that just really struck me. And it's funny because I was having a conversation with another podcast guest, Victoria Shaw, the other day, where we were talking about how, parenting from what you don't want to be doesn't always work super well.
Yeah.
And, and I was just thinking, it's like when you're parenting from what you don't want to be, and you're saying you don't know who you really, like, you don't necessarily know who you are, but also it tends to, we were talking about how that can also really backfire in that, you're kind of, you don't necessarily like have the boundaries in place that are needed.
Right.
And you might be overly permissive if you grew up in an environment that was really, not permissive enough, or so I think it's a very interesting thing how when we come from family systems that are just so fraught, that parent, the sort of the I will not be this parenting manual only, it's only part, it's only half the volume.
Right. Yeah. Well, because I knew what I didn't want to be, but I didn't know how to do it right.
Right. Exactly.
I fortunately married a man who had very steady New England parents who, so I would often go with him. Is this normal? What? And he had a brother who was 10 years younger than him. So he obviously, helped to raise that. And so he had a lot more experience than I did. But yeah, it's a problem when you define yourself by what you're not. Right.
And let's just pull this one out and hold this up, because this one is like, this is so true in so many different aspects. And like, if you take, this is like a statement that I think is so true for empaths, because it's a problem when we define ourselves as what we're not. And I think, but for so many empaths, because we are picking up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, all the stuff that is coming from the world outside of ourselves, in some ways, we actually do kind of have to start by recognizing what we are not, because we are so frequently taking everything on. We don't even know what's ours.
Right. And you get into a dysfunctional family and you're picking up all of that, and and nothing feels true. To who you are. And especially as a kid and teenager, I had no idea who I was. I didn't know what was important to me. I knew what was important to my family. And that, to some degree, the underlying values I do carry with me. But yeah, it was really, and I, honestly, my mom died, 2018. And it wasn't until she passed, or this just the last 3, 4, 5 months of her life, that I finally made peace with her. And when she passed, I didn't grieve a lot. I had 10 years of dementia to grieve through it and understand she wasn't going to change and make peace with it. But I was surprised at how lost I felt, because, when you've been pushing against something all of a sudden and it's not there, you kind of fall over.
Yes.
And it was really a weird time for me, because I no longer had something to not be, And so now, and I was 58, I guess. Late 50s. I was like, who am I really? What do I want? What do I want to do? I had just opened my healing practice that same year. So I had sort of moved into this direction, but I was kind of still hiding it and, not sure about things, and I'm not worthy, or am I smart enough, or, all those things that we get in our head especially when we get gaslit a lot.
Yes.
So I was shocked at how lost I felt. I mean, there was a relief, there was that relief of I'm no longer responsible for her.
Yes.
But there was also just this, I remember sitting, in the couple of weeks afterwards, we actually went up to the family house in Maine. You and I were talking about Maine earlier, just about a month after she died. And I remember just sitting there looking out at the lake, and not feeling anything. It was like all of that push against had just gone away. I was no longer protecting myself all the time from her, which I really did very strongly a lot. And it was this sense of emptiness that was unsettling. I wasn't afraid of it.
Yeah.
But it was just unsettling, especially at 58. It's like, okay, now,
yes,
who am I?
Yes.
What's important to me? And now that I don't have to spend so much energy protecting myself as an empath, I literally used to just wrap myself in light every time I had to be around her. How do I move through the world? And how can I now express myself in this way that I had kind of started to do? But how can I really move into that? Because that's what feels good to me.
Did your relationship with fear shift when she died?
I had worked on that a lot earlier. With a healer. I had gotten rid of my asthma and my allergies by understanding my belief about fear. So I had gotten rid of a lot of it, but there was a lot of fear around her financially, because I got into it with her husband. And there was a lot of fear about how long she was going to live.
Yes.
She was 82. And, we had insurance and she was fine financially for a while, but we also knew that she could live another 10 years. The women in her family tended to live into their 90s, and she'd already had dementia for 10 years.
Yep.
And we were on the verge of having to make the decision to move her into memory care. And everybody, my brother, who's 8 years older than me, and I, and all of her sisters, because she was the oldest of 4 sisters, we all knew that that would not be something she wanted. She was so proud of her intellect that this was a downward spiral, but we needed to figure out how to take care of her for at least another 10 years. She got diagnosed with cancer, and it was already stage 4 when we discovered it. She was given a few months to live. And at that point, that's when I really was able to make peace with her, which was beautiful because she softened when I did that. And so we had a really lovely 2 or 3 months, towards the end. Not that she was really there, but she just, I didn't have to protect myself as much. So that the fear began to dissipate when she got that diagnosis, because we knew it wasn't going to be a lot longer. And I knew that would be the end of that part of my life. And because of some problems with her husband, I knew that I was no longer going to be the responsible one for him. And, he's got his own kids. And, so it was just, it was a lot of, okay, I can really breathe deep. I can really relax. I can really allow myself that space to go, oh, yeah, who am I now?
Yeah.
So I had taken care of a lot of the fear, except that very specific fear about her.
Yeah.
And that was a big one. It was a big one.
Well, and I'm imagining, that is a logistical nightmare, and so in some ways it's like, it seems to me like, is it even fear, or is it just the irritation that feels like fear that comes from circumstances that are just like, no matter how you slice it, this just
not
sucks.
good. Yeah. I'd probably call it more anxiety than fear.
Yeah.
And partly because I was the one, she was here in Williamsburg where I live, and my brother lives in Arkansas in the back of beyond. He's a back to the earth hippie still. So I was the sort of the daughter, usually falls to the daughters anyway, right? To take care of the elders. So it was sort of my responsibility. And then because of the situation with her husband, he kind of disappeared the last year of her life. And so I really became the point person and had to work with the lawyer to protect her money from him and all this stuff that is not in my wheelhouse. I'm not a super detailed person. I'm not a linear thinker. I don't make decisions quickly and easily. And all of those things I had to do, which again, looking back at it, I did a really good job of it. I am capable of that. And that's a good thing to know about yourself. But it was not something that it just left me anxious all the time, because I was constantly trying to figure out what needed to be done next. And I had my brother's support, and I had my husband's support, and I had my aunt's support. Her next youngest sister is my dearest aunt. But they weren't here, Right. So except for my husband, who was, thank God. So very anxious, sometimes fear, because I've had money issues, my whole life from being gaslit about money. So there was a fear about it's going to bankrupt me if she lives another 10 years, those kinds of things. But yeah, predominantly anxiety. And I wouldn't be surprised, given what I know about myself now, if she was feeling anxiety. I mean, because it's very common for people with dementia to be anxious and paranoid. And
yes.
And it's part of why I had to protect myself from her. But, when it's your mother, that connection is pretty deep.
It is really deep. Yeah.
So I'm sure I was picking up on a lot of that as well.
Yeah. Well, and, you were speaking about earlier, the impact of being an incredibly intellectual, bright woman going through dementia. And this is something we've dealt with my mom. And I've also seen with a couple friends where it is so, like there's a whole other level of hard, I think, for a very smart woman to lose her mind. And with my mom, we went through a good period of time before sort of the dementia before she got to the point where dementia had softened her again, where she was so hard to deal with because she was defensive and angry and scared and really fighting, like just fighting nonstop because like this was just the worst nightmare for her.
Right.
The idea of not being like her whole identity was based on being, bright, intelligent, highly educated, and of service to the world.
Yeah.
And so I really.
And in control.
Absolutely. And in control. Yeah. There's that. Yeah.
So I think that was one of the hardest things in the early days, is that she was still trying to control everything. And she just didn't have the mental capacity to do it anymore. And boy, is that frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody.
Oh, yeah. And there's a thing I've also witnessed in regards to dementia that I think anybody who's dealt with dementia, with parents or other loved ones, is that there's a long period of time where people still have their legal autonomy.
Yeah.
And they can get themselves into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Because the family members, and especially the close family members, can see how demented somebody is. But the society, especially for a very bright, intelligent person, but let's just say women who are really bright and intelligent, they have this sort of like, they've got this entire like lexicon of vocabulary and sort of like programmed language that they can just, like they're like chatty Cathy. They can just push the button and say these things that pass for intelligence very effectively. And so they fly under the radar for a long period of time, doing really crazy things, but you have no legal right to intervene or to intercede or do anything about it.
Yeah. Especially when they're married and it's not to your dad.
Right.
Then there's that other layer of, I can't step in. I can only advise,
Right. And you kind of have to watch the train wreck as it's painful.
It is. It really is. It is. I'm, doing everything I can to not get dementia because it's a horrible way to end your life. It's
awful. It's ghastly. I hear you. I was really lucky. I discovered with, my genetic gene data, gene crunching from 23andMe that I do not have the dementia gene that both my parents have. Because both of my parents have had dementia. My mom is still alive. My dad isn't. But I also realized with my mother, my mother's mother died, had dementia very early. And so my mother was absolutely terrified of dementia. Like my mom would joke about, just put me on an ice floe if I start losing my mind. Like when we were when she was probably in her like mid 30s and early 40s, she was already terrified of dementia.
Yeah, my mother too. Same thing with her mother. Yeah.
And I actually realized for myself that I cannot repeat her terror or her fear of dementia, that there's a part of me that's like, okay, I'm either going to have it or I'm not going to have it. I have the genes in my favor in that I don't have the gene mutation that both of my parents had, amazingly. But I also am like, it is going to be what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Because I just realized for my mother, the gripping terror that she experienced about dementia from the time she was in her mid 30s until until it got so bad that she couldn't remember. She no longer has the capacity to recognize she has dementia.
Right. Can't remember that she can't remember.
Yeah. And she doesn't know what dementia is anymore.
Right.
Like it was a very long trajectory. And with my mom, I mean, one of the things that happened was that she had a benzo habit. Nobody would ever, 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 ever think of my mother as an addict. This is somebody who was taking like half of a 25 milligram like benzodiazepine, like half of one, before bed every night. But from like basically perimenopause until I think even now, she's still being medicated for anxiety. And the thing is that the benzos are notorious for contributing to dementia.
Yeah.
So the irony was her terror, her anxiety, and her fear probably exacerbated.
Yeah.
And her medicating for it probably exacerbated her genetic predisposition towards it as well.
Yeah. The other piece of that is the spiritual piece where, what you dwell on is what you draw to yourself.
Yes.
So I try to just live a good, healthy life and not fixate on it. And every now and then I go, I really don't want to do that. But I don't, like you said, I don't dwell on it.
No.
Because it is either it's going to happen or it's not. And there's, all I can do is keep myself healthy, and that's good for me no matter what, what my elder years look like. So it's not a way I want to go, but if that's the way it is, that's the way it is.
So as we're having this conversation, I mean, this is just, I could talk about, narcissistic parents and dementia for hours and hours and hours.
Combination.
It's such a combination, isn't it just? And one of the things that you were talking about was, I mean, just the driving yourself out of the skid, reclaiming your health. And also, sort of like, I mean, a couple things I wanted to touch on was one, sort of like, how did you find out or recognize you were an empath? And then really talking about the relationship with your intuition, the relationship with your guides, like how did stuff shift? So I know I just threw a whole bunch of different pieces out at you. So I don't know, maybe we just start with talking about really like that journey of driving out of the skid, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's well, I feel like I got to start is that I didn't know I was an empath for the longest time. I mean, it's really, and if I used to read science fiction fantasy books where there were empaths,
right?
And I loved them, and I have I read a whole bunch of them, and the Dragon Riders of Pern where they're empathic with their dragons.
Yes.
So I love the concept, but I didn't.
You had run into it wasn't that you were somebody who had never encountered the concept, because I know there are people who have never encountered, but you had encountered the concept, but didn't identify.
Right. But I didn't know that it was a real thing. It was science fiction fantasy.
Right.
And I will tell you that I have, in my books that I've written about heroines who have gifts I have now. I had no idea I had. So clearly at some level, I knew these kinds of things. And I know I've been a healer in many lifetimes. So, it's not like this is new this time around, but, so I don't know exactly when I identified that way, but I did start my best friend, who was also a writer. That's how we met. I was doing some research for a book and had hooked up with a psychic group up in Northern Virginia where she lives. And she had started to meet all of these people with all of these gifts. And I think she's the one who probably identified me, because that's kind of her role. She, she leads me into these things. I don't remember specifically, but I'm pretty sure she was the one who probably said, Lauren, you're an empath. But, and that once, and sometimes once you get that knowledge about yourself, everything kind of clicks into place. The universe starts bringing you information about it. And so it wasn't I didn't resist the idea that I was an empath. It just made total sense to me.
Of course. Yeah. And
so, and I had already, well, I guess at the same time I was beginning to be brought into the spiritual the spiritual path of my life. And so there was all kinds of strange things happening that I was just I just was going, oh, that's very cool. Tell me more about that. It's like, yes, I want to do that. Thank you very much. because it fascinated me. It was something I've always been fascinated in fiction and written about in fiction, but never dreamed that I could do those things myself or have those experiences. So yeah, I mean, I was definitely in the menopause, phase of my life before I even identified. But that's also when I learned how to shield myself, which helped me tremendously with my mother during those last 10 years of her life. In fact, it was during that 10 years. It wasn't because I was really bombarded by her. It would feel like I got punched in the chest every time I walked into her apartment for a long time.
Yeah. So
somebody taught me how to, in fact, it was, there was a psychic that my friend had gone to see, and she said, you got to come up and go see this guy. He's really amazing. And I totally trust her. She's like my sister that I, never had. And so I had a reading with him. And one of the things he told me was that you need to shield yourself. And he taught me how to do that. It's kind of like an invisibility cloak visualization, and that was the first tool I was given as an empath. And it was by far the most important tool I was given as an empath, because it really did help me in those last years with my mom. And it helps me now. The world is a very hard place to be. And especially during the pandemic, you'd go to the grocery store and I would sit in my car for a few minutes before I went in and ground myself and shield myself, because otherwise I'd walk in and I would just be almost in tears within seconds from all the fear and anxiety in the atmosphere. So
especially the beginning of the pandemic, and
didn't know anything.
Nobody knew anything. And like you'd walk down the aisles and the shelves would be empty. And it would be sort of like, how long is this going to go on? And is this the beginning of like the world changing? It was really intense.
It was. So as an empath, it was that tool, that one single tool that I got one of my very first, times I was really dipping my toe in the spirituality world, is still probably the strongest tool that I have in my toolbox as an empath. And I still have to occasionally remember, okay, I'm feeling this stuff and I don't want to feel this stuff. So, okay, I'm just going to put my cloak around me. And I always envision it with mirrors on the outside, so that anything coming to me, I always intention that it gets reflected back. I always use the term from whence it came as love. As love. So that it's, I'm turning it into something more positive. But I don't want it. It's not mine.
It's not yours. Yeah. No. Yeah. I, dropping the cloak of invisibility on us and that reflective shield is such a powerful way to like not be the person who's just absorbing all of it all the time. Yeah. And something you're saying that I just really want to hold up is the fact that you were experiencing, like, I don't know if this is true, but from the way you're describing it, it sounds to me like even if you were not in the physical proximity of your mom, and as you were saying, when you were away from your dad, you could still feel their energy. And I think that that's the thing too, with some of these relationships, you don't have to be in their physical proximity to still be impacted by them. And that's a really big deal as well.
Yeah. And you feel crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way.
Right. Well, and then if you're dealing with a gaslighter who's saying to you, no, everything is fine. There's nothing wrong here. Dad's not drinking.
Right.
Then you really don't know what's going on because you can't even get a reality check. You can't go and look and be like, nope, he's drunk as a skunk.
Right.
Yeah. It's really crazy making.
It is crazy making.
Yeah. Something that has been occurring to me as I've been hearing people talk about, people who come into understanding themselves as empaths later and come into things clicking together. I've been realizing that in some ways, I wonder if some of this sort of clicking it all together is a developmental thing, because I'm somebody who knew I was an empath at a very, very early age. And I started learning the tools of filters and shields and things like that at a very early age. But I did not necessarily know how to put it all together or how to protect myself. Like it was a real learning process and a learning curve. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that those of you who come into this in your 40s and 50s frequently get it a lot faster than those of us who like were born into it, but have been sort of struggling with it. And sometimes I really wonder if like, it's like whether, sort of you got to get to a certain place in life in order to fully integrate something and to fully understand it.
Yeah. I think that's true about a lot of things, that there's things that we gather along the way, but we don't really know how to implement them or don't know how to combine them in a creative way. And when you're in a position where you just desperately need help and somebody goes, here, try this, and it works, it's like, okay, this is good. I've got this,
Yeah.
And I do feel like I resisted the spiritual path for a little while, but once I sort of began to see that there was realness to it, there was actual things happening that we couldn't see. For me, it was like, okay, great. I've been experiencing this my whole life. Bring it on. Let me, help me understand this. How can it's a superpower, right? To be able to feel like this doesn't feel like a superpower when you don't know what's happening, but it is such a gift to me now. But that's also because I can control when I'm willing to receive what other people are feeling and when I'm not, right? So there's a choice there as opposed to just being bombarded all the time.
Right.
That's huge.
That is absolutely huge. The other thing that you were speaking about that I think is a really important thing to acknowledge is, for you, the conditioning of what is fiction and what is nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that like you had all of this magic within you, you had all this sensitivity within you, and yet maybe because of like your family, who knows, but that there was sort of like, oh no, this is all relegated to fiction.
Right.
Which in some ways, like for me, seeing the Star Trek episode, the empath with Jem, which my initials are Jem.
I remember that one for sure.
Yeah. I did not like it was not fiction to me. Like I saw it and I went, oh, like, and it was sort of like, I did not have that boundary of like, this is fiction, therefore this cannot be real for me. And I'm just thinking though, that for so many people, that boundary of, no, that's fiction, this is fantasy, this is fiction, this is magic is not real.
Mm-hmm.
And how hard that is when you're coming up against the reality of your sensitivity.
Yeah. It's, I don't know exactly why I didn't embrace it as real. I think fiction for me was an escape from my family. And so escaping into something different was very attractive. And I'm just thinking about this now, but in a way, I think if I had known that was real too, that it wouldn't have been an escape for me, So I don't know exactly why I kept that so separate, but I loved movies. I loved books. I loved television shows. And like I said, I've read all of these things well into my adulthood. I don't read them a lot anymore because I get to live it now, but I just resonated with them so much, and I just thought I was weird,
I wonder, as you were speaking, I wonder if something about the programming to be terrified of the world and terrified of reality, like the world is a scary place.
Yeah.
If in some ways there was such a deep sense of conditioning about the fact that the world is this dangerous, scary place, to have magic be part of reality would suddenly taint it into danger and scary.
Yeah. That feels very true. It does. It's like, that's the beauty and don't bring it into this ugly world.
Right.
Yeah. That feels very true, actually.
Yeah.
That was my happy place. It was my escape.
Right.
And if it's part of my everyday life, then it's just part of the crap.
Yes.
So thank you for that insight.
You're so welcome. And what an amazing pivot to go from that being fantasy to it now being reality for you.
Yeah. How cool is that?
That's amazing.
I know.
It's awesome.
I love what I do now. And it's so satisfying and empowering to like step into what you're really here to do. And I did resist this journey for a while. And I think it was because I was still baked in that fear. I didn't want to change anything because life was pretty good and safe and stable at the moment. And I did have a lot of fear that me stepping into this other path was going to disrupt that in a way that would, explode my life in ways that were not good.
Right. Well, and I really think of it as like sort of the letting go of the good to go for the great. If you have a sure thing,
I like that.
Yeah. If you have a sure thing, it's actually I think it's the subtitle of a chapter for a book that in a multi-author book that is going to be coming out in possibly around the same time that this podcast is coming out. But, I think that when you have a sure thing, like you were an award-winning author, where you were getting, and also your identity is tied into, you're getting all these strokes, you're getting all of this validation, you're getting all of this acknowledgement. Not only are you letting go or you potentially killing the golden goose, but you are also surrendering an identity where you've been getting accolades, where you've been getting validation, where you've been getting a lot of acknowledgement. That is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Especially to go from sure thing to uncertainty and starting and building from the ground up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And that's really, I walked away from writing the novels. I think my last one came out in 2015. And I had a great publisher, and they're still advertising them regularly, which is unheard of in this industry. And I walked away
fact that your publishers are advertising your books is unheard. Like, really?
At all. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, that's a whole other magical story we'll have to talk about sometime. How that happened. But it was some of it was a fear of success. And I think that's because anytime I did step into the spotlight, my mom would find a way to, make it not feel good. Mm-hmm. She used to say, "So when are you going to write a real book?"
Ooh.
After I won an award with my very first novel kind of thing, but it was a romance. So it didn't count as a real book.
Didn't count as a real book.
So I think there was some of that going on. But also I think I was just ready for something new. I was starting this path. And I didn't know where it was going to take me, but it's what I came here to do, in this lifetime. So it was, every little twist and turn brings you to where you're supposed to be next, if you allow it to.
Yeah.
But I was definitely afraid of losing what I had for something that was unknown. Yeah.
Lauren, this feels like a 2-part conversation because I cannot believe how fast the time has gone by. And I literally mean that. Because I really wanted to talk about, working with our guides and just, sort of your relationship with intuition. And you were saying this other magical story about the writing and everything. And we're really coming up against the time. So I guess for right now, what I would like to, and I'm sure that my audience, I imagine you guys would love to have Lauren back and hear more of her story. Yeah.
I would love to come back and continue because I just love talking to you. It's just
it is
fun.
Such a delight. And I'm just like, I'm hearing more of your story and the time, like you and I were born within a couple of years of each other. We both dealt with demented parents. There are so many amazing similarities, as well as having a very high-powered, really intensely smart, and somewhat narcissistic or very narcissistic, in your case, mother. I was joking that the way I sort of think of my mom's flavor of narcissism is that nobody would ever unless you really knew what was going on under the hood. That I would call her she's the pumpkin spice latte version of narcissism. But and I don't know, like some people everybody's mileage may vary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But the question that I want to ask you right now is what, if they're like, what right now feels like the audience, like that you want to be sure that we hear?
The word that comes to mind is hope. The world is hard right now, and it has been for a while. And I think it's going to be for at least another couple of years, maybe longer. but there is so much good that is rising.
There is so much good that is rising.
And women are leading it. The divine
Yes.
feminine is rising quickly and is this beautiful balancing energy that we need in the world. So there's a lot of hope. I feel very hopeful that a better world is being built.
Mm-hmm.
It's just still kind of submerged. It hasn't come up into, the general public's awareness yet, but it's rising and it's rising fast.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that's what I want to leave people with, because that's what I come back to. It's kind of a touchstone for me right now. I grew up in a very political family, believe it or not. And so I have a hard time turning off that. And so I just have to remind myself that there is so much going on that is not being reported on, is not being seen. And my favorite touchstone is a picture of the women's rally after Trump was elected in 2016, all those pink hats filling DC and the joy.
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't even there and I could feel the joy.
It was spectacular
Yes.
to just feel it. I was up here in Maine and we were like anchoring the light. My friend Amy was with me up here and we were just holding the space and holding the love
That's what I
and
did.
beaming light. And it really was absolutely spectacular. And you're right. The way things are reported is not necessarily what's really going on in the world. And the other thing is, I was just thinking about the sort of the relationship to narcissism. If sort of like, it's almost like we have this kind of like cultural epidemic of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that that narcissists do is they gaslight people to believe the reality that isn't even theirs.
Right.
Like they're so invested in being right that even if their reality is not real, they will gaslight everybody else into it. And I think right now we're kind of being gaslit into seeing the world through this lens darkly, where it's like, and there are definitely agents of chaos that are invested in keeping people scared, keeping people down. So I love your message of just, and the reminder of all of the hope and also just like the goodness that is rising, that is being restored.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so, hang in there because it's coming. It's rising fast. And the more of us who tap into that light and bring our own light to it, the faster it's going to rise.
Exactly. And something you said earlier, it's like where we focus our attention is what we build on. We can focus on the fear and we can focus, or we can focus on the light, focus on the light.
Yeah.
So Lauren, before we complete this, one of the things I always love to do with everybody is to use this broadcast as a time machine, because I really believe there's something magical about broadcasting. There's something magical about words that go across time and space.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe that not only does this podcast exist in perpetuity for God only knows how long, and gets to perhaps exist beyond you and I, wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool? And, so that I know that this message is broadcasting well into the future. But I also really believe that this podcast is like a piece of fabric in the timeline that can fold over on itself and that we can broadcast backwards. And so thinking about this moment in time, folding over and touching another moment in time when you were young, when you were struggling, when you really were being gaslit and did not feel it, and you were sick and confused and just all of that. If you knew that you could go back to her and look straight in her eyes, maybe hold her face in the palm, in your hands and look her in the eye, what would you say to her?
I would tell her that she is strong and courageous and wise beyond knowing, and that she had everything she needed to move through the world, and it was going to be great.
You are strong. You are wise. You are courageous. You have everything you need. So, Lauren, before I let you go, how do people get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way is my website, because you can get to all my socials and email and all of that there. But it is heartlightjoy.com. I have a couple of free things there that I would love for you to take advantage of. One is if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free PDF download that is Lauren's top 3 ways to communicate with your guides. It's kind of a primer for introducing you to what that's like. And we will have to talk about that again, because that's a passion of mine. And the other one is I offer a free 20-minute call, and there's no requirement for this. I love to talk to people and get to know them. And if we connect in a way that you want to explore further, I'm all great for that. If we connect in a way that just makes you feel good in the moment, I'm good with that too, because I just love to share the energy. And so that's also on my website.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So you guys, you can find all of these in the show notes. And if Lauren will give me permission, I will also include links for her novels.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So you can check out Lauren's romance novels as well. Lauren, thank you so much for being here. I would love to have you back, because I really do want to have a conversation about guides and about trusting our intuition and about sort of the journey. It feels like this episode was kind of like part 1. It's like the story of who you are, how you got here. Yeah. And then, and then part 2 can really be about what does it look like now? So
yeah, I would love to talk about that. So
that'd be awesome. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation.
You're a great host, and I love being in your energy.
Oh, right back at you, sister. Right back at you.
As we come to the end of this episode, I'd love to hear what you're taking from this show. Please jump over to empathicmasteryshow.com to leave your comments. In the show notes, you'll find a link to grab your copy of my Empathic Safety Guide, 3 Basics for Finding Calm in the Eye of the Storm. And while you're there, please subscribe and follow this show. And thank you for your help sharing this show with the people who need it. Please help me to spread the word and send this podcast to friends or family members who need support living as highly sensitive empathic people. Then join me again when the next Empathic Mastery Show airs. Okay, one last time. Hop over to empathicmasteryshow.com for your Empathic Safety Guide. And until next show, shine on. We need you and your gifts here on this planet. So please don't judge your empathic rainbow by colorblind standards.